Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we take a look and update on the number one seed battle between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings in the NFC. Plus, we get you ready for Eagles Titans with 3 bets each, LOE 3 presented by BetOnline. Coming up, all that and more on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Friday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before, because BetOnline is where the game starts. We're getting you ready for Eagles Titans this Sunday at 1 o'clock at Lincoln Financial Field. Gino, a big one for the Eagles. They're 10-1, but they are trying to keep pace in this NFC, trying to make sure they secure home field advantage. Only 6 games remaining on the schedule. And like I said, man, it's important. The Minnesota Vikings are 9-2. They're right behind you. The Dallas Cowboys are 8-3 in this division. All 4 NFC East teams right now would make the playoffs if the season ended today. Crazy enough. So it's crazy. We've been saying it a lot on the show for the last month or two, but 9 games over 500, and you can't be comfortable. This is a big game against a 7-4 Titans team that's frauds when it comes to being a title contender, but they have a high floor, and they're a good, tough team to play.
Well, taking a step back to before the season, this was one of those games that we said there weren't many big tests for the Eagles, but it was Green Bay. It was this game. It was Minnesota. It's the Dallas game, and why this one is so important, Lou, is because this is the last home game that you have minus the last 2 weeks of the season. You're going on a 3-game road stretch after this to pick up one more win at Lincoln Financial Field in front of that crowd with how well Jalen Hurts has been playing, how well the defense has been playing as of late. This is going to be a game that comes down to, I believe, who can just punch the ball in the red zone more, because I believe Derrick Henry is going to set up some play action. Both teams are going to have chances in opponent's territory. Can the Eagles pass the ball, unlike last week where we knew that they were going to have to run it? This is a team that is very susceptible to the pass. That's one of those tests that we want to see. Can they continue to change their game plan week to week to week? Because when they go on the road and they're not in a favorable environment, you're going to have to win in a variety of different ways. In Chicago, you might have to just continue to run the football and keep Justin Fields off the field, and same with Dallas as well, not give the ball back to that offense. And the Giants, it might be one of those games where you're pass happy as well, going against a good defensive front that stops the run very well. Tennessee is a mixture, I think, of a lot of the teams that you'll see down the stretch, with a quarterback who – he's a little bit athletic. He could get outside. They'll do some play action with him. They'll bootleg him out. They'll hand the ball off to Derrick Henry. You'll see some Treylon Burks in some play action down the field. And on the defensive side of the ball, this isn't a pushover at all. Jeffrey Simmons on the interior. You got Kevin Byard on the back end. Tennessee is right in the race for the AFC as well, so they need this game just as badly as we do, Lou. So you can't look at this one and say, all right, we have to focus on the next 3 weeks. It's still 1-0. And this one, last game in Lincoln Financial Field, 3 games on the road, 2 games to finish up at home.
Yeah, it's
win
big.
This one.
And the Titans are a better team than, we did say that when the schedule came out. Like, there aren't a lot of tough tests this year, but one of them would be the Titans. And I didn't think they were going to be this good without A.J. Brown. Like, we knew, again, they had almost like a 2021 Eagles kind of floor with how well they run the football. But I don't think we projected their defense to be this good. And that's the thing, is like, they don't have, at times they were never a top tier passing offense with A.J. Brown, but they could take over some games and push the ball down the field with Brown. This year, they really don't have that in the passing game, but their defense has almost stepped up to kind of replace that production in a way. So it's definitely a big matchup. And, Gino, looking at this 1 seed race right now, so the Eagles are a game up on Minnesota. They're 10-1. The Vikings are 9-2. Looking at the schedules, I mean, you mentioned the 3-game road trip coming up. Looking at Minnesota's schedule, the Eagles, they technically have the harder schedule. Their total opposing record is 36-32. Minnesota's is 29-13. 33-1. So there are only two teams left, Minnesota, that plays teams over 500. They play the Jets this week, and then in a month they play the Giants at 7-4. So on paper, the Vikings have the easier path the rest of the way, but I still think the Eagles get the bye week because I think Minnesota is a much more beatable team. You look at, they play the Bears on the road, the Packers, the Colts, and the Lions. I could see all of those teams pushing Minnesota. It's crazy, man. Like, they're 9-2, but they're 13th this year in point differential, only at +5. So I still think the Eagles lock up this 1 seed, a game up plus the head-to-head tiebreaker.
So if you look at that, it's 3 division games for both of these teams. And with the Giants playing the way that they have, I think that's a much more favorable matchup for the Philadelphia
They have a -7 point
Eagles.
differential, man. The Giants are probably the worst 7-4 team I've seen.
They've been on a descent in a very bad way the last couple of weeks. And I think they're inevitably going to find their way out of the mix away from the Eagles and Cowboys, who are at the top of the NFC East, who have both beaten Minnesota and in a commanding fashion at that. I think Dallas is a bigger threat because if you drop one of those games, that's a 2-game swing.
Sure.
And all of a sudden they're right back in it. It's in Jerry World. It's on Christmas Eve. It's a huge stage. The audience for that game, Lou, is going to be all time. I mean, the viewers on a Christmas Eve game, everybody's off of work. Cowboys, Eagles. I mean, you can't make that story up. Potentially for the 1 seed. I'm more focused on Dallas right now because you've already taken care of Minnesota. You took care of Dallas when they had Cooper Rush. The big test in front of you is taking care of beating Dak Prescott, that revitalized rush offense with the Dallas Cowboys and that defense, which always is ever so deadly. And to wrap it up, to win that 1 seed because you already have the tiebreaker over Minnesota, don't allow any ground to Dallas. That's the game you have to focus on.
I agree.
But at the same time, you still can't drop these games because every other team could continue to win their games. Like you said, Minnesota could lose those games. I think they could lose to Detroit. I think they could lose to Chicago in a way. And I think Green Bay always has their number. But if they play Chicago or if they play Minnesota football, they could win all 3 of those. And it's a different discussion.
This is the thing. If the Eagles, let's just say the Eagles split the rest of the way, they go 3-3 because they do have the tougher schedule. I mean, their division matchups are tougher than the Vikings. They have the Giants twice. They have the Cowboys. They have this matchup with the Titans coming up. That's harder than what the Vikings have. But let's say Minnesota went 5. So if the Eagles went 3-3, the Vikings would have to go 5-1 the rest of the way to get ahead of to get ahead of the Eagles because they can't have the same record. The Eagles have that head-to-head tiebreaker. They would need to win 2 more games than Philly the rest of the way. So I'm just saying, this is a bad scenario where the Eagles drop 3 of their next 6. I don't think that's going to even be the case. But if they went 500 the rest of the way, Minnesota would still have to win 5 of their final 6. And it's an easier schedule, but again, Minnesota it feels like a bad 2 seed in a conference. I don't know. It just doesn't seem as dangerous. I agree with you. I think Dallas is the bigger focus. And when it comes to like actual playoff threats in the NFC, I wouldn't say either are the scariest team. I think it's San Francisco, or I'd still rather play one of those teams. And honestly, as weird as this might sound right now with how they're playing, I'd still rather play them over Tom Brady.
I think that team's.
I don't know, man. I'd rather play the Vikings and the Buccaneers after seeing what we did to them. I don't know.
The biggest threat to all of football is DeMeco Ryans' defense with the San Francisco 49ers.
Because they're not a threat to get the 1 seed, but they're a threat to get to the Super Bowl.
They're a threat to beat any team in the playoffs because that defense is just as good as it has been the last 4 years, and DeMeco Ryans has honed that thing in. And you know that Shanahan, he'll get the offense cooking as long as the defense is going. Now they have Christian McCaffrey. Brandon Ayuk is playing at an all-time level. Yeah. Deebo Samuel is
their group of 4 weapons
just
is
Deebo
maybe
Samuel.
The best in the league.
I would
a core 4.
I would say if you gave Jalen Hurts to that offense, I mean, it completely revitalizes the tune, and that's why Trey Lance being out to me is one of those
things. Which was their logic of drafting Lance.
Yeah, I think you could beat Jimmy G. I don't think you can beat that defense when it's playing at that elite level. That would be the biggest question mark to me. But the focus right now, get the 1 seed, take care of Dallas in that matchup. Because unlike Minnesota, where Minnesota would have to win 5 games, if they lose that game, that could flip the entire tiebreaker on its head. Yep. And they would have to probably come back down to point differential at that point. I mean,
which
if they
Dallas
ended up tied,
is second right now and Philly is third. So that would it'd be close.
I don't know
man.
if it's similar opponents or if it's point differential, what it goes down
That's
to.
a good question. Yeah,
but you got to go 2-0 against Dallas this season.
Or is it division record? I'm not sure. We'd have to check the tiebreaker, but
let's not worry about that. Take care of business.
Right now,
get the 1 seed.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just beat Dallas because you already beat them once. Sweep Dallas, and I think you're looking great. We'll get into more of this conversation coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Guys, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. Here's how it works. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they're going to score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. So go bet with Jalen Hurts to hit the over, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, maybe even Quez Watkins. I think the Eagles are going to throw all over the Tennessee Titans, and we'll get into that later on in the show. Prize Picks, it's not competing against other people. It's just you versus their projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport you watch. Of course, you can bet on the Eagles and the NFL. You can bet on college football, the NBA, MLB when it comes back. Hockey's going on right now in the NHL. You got PGA golf. I could keep going. They even have disc golf. I mean, MMA, boxing, Euro basketball, cricket. You name it. It's all available at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states in Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks is going to give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget, enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, guys, make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insight only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your shows. Gino and I were taking a look at the current race for the 1 seed in the NFC between the Eagles and the Vikings, and you can throw the Dallas Cowboys in there as well. The Eagles looking like they're in good shape right now at 10-1. They've got the Tennessee Titans coming up this Sunday at the Link. And, Gino, the thing is, it's a luxury that we get to talk about, like, securing the 1 seed because they are so good this year. They're going to make the playoffs. They are the 2 games up right now for the lead in the NFC East. And the playoffs are a lock. That's the thing. They could actually lock it up, I believe, this week in a certain scenario. And that would mean they have made the playoffs now 5 of their last 6 seasons. And if my math is correctly, I did this research before the show, the only other time they have made it in 5 of 6 seasons, right? Or this happened in the early 2000s, 6 of 7 were those NFC title teams with Donovan McNabb and Andy Reid. And, Gino, it's kind of crazy, man, because I feel like this team, it's almost more impressive they've made it in 5 of their last 6 because this consistency has come despite the roster being way less stable than in those early 2000s. You've had different quarterbacks, different head coaches. The roster has been ever changing. They had to deal with a rebuild in 2020. It's almost more impressive that they've been able to sustain this with all these waves hitting them. So 5 of 6, man. Locked On Eagles, it's going to be 4 or 5.
The last time they went 10-1 as well. We know what happened there.
Yeah, they won a Super Bowl, 2017.
They won a Super Bowl. That's one of those things. It's the lessons from the past, I would say. Now the Eagles, if you have looked at it, have done it in 2 different manners. They've done it in a way that was very reminiscent to what the Patriots had done. Similar pieces, similar core, same head coaches, same coordinators. The same guys were all around in the early 2000s. As of late, it has been a mixture. It has been an older roster. It's been a younger roster. It's been free agents that have been acquired. It's been a drafted quarterback. It's been a quarterback who is potentially going to retire, who is formerly a Hall of Fame guy. Yeah, it's truly unbelievable how much has changed for the Philadelphia Eagles. Yet one thing stays the same: the culture to find a way to get to the playoffs and get yourself in a chance to find a way to the playoffs. And that, if you look at teams around different sports, I think you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, for example. as of late? Have they been that same dynasty that they were early on when it was Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and the same group of guys over and over again? No, it's been some up and downs, but still they find a way. Those veteran
Kind of like
teams
the Warriors
find
NBA
a way.
too.
Exactly.
Like
As of late.
Yeah, they had Kevin Durant, and then they went through a few weird years with injuries, and now they're back with a revised, because they're such a well-run culture and organization, man. It's true. I think you got to give credit, though, to the consistent factors you've had. Like, you look at the core and the trenches, they haven't gone anywhere, right? So, having a Jason Kelsey and a Lane Johnson and Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, that's the one good thing, and I think this is why they've made the playoffs in 5 of 6, when a lot else was inconsistent at quarterback, injuries, the GM wasn't great at times, the head coach as well. They always, though, had those guys, the captains right now, right in the middle of this team. And I think that's a huge credit for sure for the success.
You have to find stability one way or another. And how did they find stability early on in those years? It was Andy Reid. I mean, Andy Reid was the captain of that organization.
And they had the quarterback. They had the coach and quarterback.
Exactly. They had a quarterback that was tied to said head coach. How have they done it lately? Well, they have found consistent factors that haven't been the head coach, because they fired one of them. He was a factor, but then they had to turn to another guy. But the people that have been there for now 4 head coaches, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelsey, these guys have been there since those years where they took those lessons that the remaining guys of those teams, the last guys that were on those Super Bowl teams, taught them the ways. And it's almost like how stories are just told from generation to generation and passed down. Well, the Eagles' story is we find a way to get into the playoffs. We have a quarterback that is probably going to be more athletic than the quarterback on the other side of the field. He is going to keep us in games. We're going to get playmakers that mesh well with that quarterback. We're going to be able to grind down teams in the run game. We're going to be able to stop the ball on the other side of the football on defense and take away the pass. If you look at the good teams over the last 20, 30 years for the Eagles, it's been a lot of the same things.
Right. It's just coming in a more chaotic way now.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like from 2000 to 2000, and you could even say 8, right? I mean, that entire era of McNabb and Reed, they had a lot of the same pieces, right? But the success the Eagles have had in the last 6 years, it's been the same thing, right? Elite trench play. You've had elite quarterback play. You've had coach of the year seasons it's just come from different guys, right? You've had Doug Peterson be a coach of the year candidate, and now Nick Sirianni. You've gotten, as dramatic as the quarterback position has been here, you've gotten elite play from Carson Wentz, from Nick Foles, from Jalen Hurts. It just hasn't come in the stable way that you would hope like it did in the early 2000s. I think you're on that track now, but it's just been in a more chaotic consistency, which is, it almost feels like an oxymoron.
It's almost like the early 2000s were like a lazy river, right? It's so enjoyable because you're not really doing anything. You're just sitting there. It's all the same. There's not much chaos. But then it's still very fun to do. But then the chaotic way is you're going down a water slide that has all these twists and turns, and you don't know what's coming. And then at the end, you just go back and forth and you go around this one thing that'll just drop you off and you're all confused. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh, that was still fun though. That was still a way that I enjoyed my football. And how do we enjoy football? We enjoy it through finding success one way or another. And the most fun that I have had supporting this team came in those years of chaos, like 2008. I thought that was such a fun year because it was finding a way through adversity. The early 2010s team.
That's why I like 2018 and 2019. As toxic as those teams were. I mean, it's fun that way. And so I think they're on the right path now, Gino, though, to having that early 2000s consistency. I think why you didn't have that, of course, you had all this drama at quarterback, coach, GM, bad draft classes, right? You were an old team too, but now you're hitting on draft classes. Howie has done such a good job of building things back quickly from the ground up in 2020 on, then now things feel more stabilized again, where it just feels like this can last a lot longer. And again, as dramatic as quarterback has been, and as unpredictable as it was the way you found your guy, you did find your guy, and he's 24 years old. And again, as many different factors as we're hitting on here, comparing those two eras, they had their long-term quarterback and coach. And I do think you have that right now. And that's the Patriots dynasty. The Patriots dynasty was a 2-man dynasty.
It's finding a way for the people that have the biggest effect on the football team to have the most success.
Yeah.
And if your head coach and your quarterback can find a way to be the most successful, rising tides lift all boats. It'll make everybody else in the organization that much better. And like you said, Lou, I believe that consistency in the way that they have gone about it since 2017 went and came and went. Things haven't been so smooth, but once again, that water starts to level out. It's getting a little glassier. You can start to see the bottom a little bit.
Yeah.
And we know at the bottom, hopefully when it clears, there's another Lombardi
and that's
in
a
that
luxury,
trophy
man.
case.
And that's a luxury that we've had as Eagles fans, that they don't take as long. Some teams, like the Jacksonville Jaguars, made an AFC title in 2017, and they've been down ever since. There's a lot of teams that take a long time to get back. This has happened 3 times now, when Andy Reid got fired, when Chip Kelly got fired, when Doug Peterson got fired, that it took a year or two, and suddenly you're back in the playoffs and you're competing for championships. So I think that's a testament to Jeffrey Lurie really just throwing everything he has, money and time and effort, into making sure this team's a winner. And that's what they care about. And it's why they've made the playoffs, and they're going to make it 5 of the last 6 seasons. That has only happened one other time in Eagles history, the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2006. They made it in 6 of 7 seasons. So they're going to get into the postseason again in 2022. They could clinch. They have a big game this week against the Tennessee Titans. Gino, coming up next, we'll get into our LOE 3 bets each, 3 player props that we like in this Eagles-Titans matchup.
Our final episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by our friends over at Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure that you're going to love. If you're listening to us here at Locked On Eagles, there's a reason. You love football, you love the sport, you love listening to it. So find Think Like a Champion now wherever you get your podcast. Think Like a Champion is a new podcast from Russell Wilson and Audible. Russ is a champion on and off the field, but off of it, we rarely know the grind that goes into the path of greatness. Russell Wilson, alongside co-host Harry Wilson and the late Trevor Moawad, digs into the high-performance athletes, artists, and leaders that push the boundaries of their potential. Each episode features interviews with Olympic medalists, NFL stars, and business leaders. It's available and free on Audible or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you check out our friends at Audible. You can find the Locked On Eagles podcast over there as well.
This is the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase, and he's Gino Camilleri. Our final show before Eagles-Titans this Sunday. Gino, kind of a little bit of a revenge game for that 2018 collapse.
Big time.
I want to get this team. That game bothers us a lot. Me and you especially. We bring it up a lot in the show. Just the way they collapsed. Definitely a revenge game in our eyes, for sure.
It's the toxic girlfriend that you just think back on. You're like, why do I have anxiety and all these problems? It's like, because of that game. That game leads me to so much devastation and just downright bad.
And then you got back together with the Toxic X, and they did it again against Carolina.
Exactly.
So yeah, hopefully we don't suffer the same fate on Sunday. Gino, we got our LOE 3 now, presented by BetOnline, where we go through each. We like to bet 3 player props each in this game, trying to win you guys some money over at the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is BetOnline. So, Gino, taking a look at our bets this week, the theme of all 6 bets is that we are all in on the passing game, the Eagles through the air against Tennessee.
You look at last week. We knew they were going to run the football. That wasn't a question. Green Bay, that has been their downturn. We beat them in 2019 off of that same type of mentality. When Jalen Hurts came in as a rookie, we saw the flashes of what he could do against them in the run. Well, they ran for 363 yards. The thing about Tennessee and the thing about the Eagles is that they can adapt to the weaknesses of their opponents. Well, Tennessee Titans cannot defend the outside throws to wide receivers. They are outright bad, just poor at being able to do so. It's Christian Fulton, who you loved coming out of that draft, Lou.
And he's banged up, right? I think he's been dealing with a hamstring injury, so they weren't doing well even when they were healthy, and they've got some injuries back there too. Caleb Farley was benched as well. This is just a bad secondary. I'm going all in on the idea of the revenge game. There are still guys from that 2018 team, which probably are just as upset about that game as we are. And there's one guy that is going to surpass all of that hatred for Tennessee, and his name is A.J. Brown.
I had to go all in on A.J. Brown.
I was going to say, I thought I was getting aggressive. You went over the top with your belief in A.J. Brown, which I think is justified, though.
I have to take some swings to get back into this. It's not been great for me here at LOE3. So I'm going A.J. Brown, 120 yards, 1 or more passing touchdowns, or just getting a touchdown at all, and the Philadelphia Eagles win at plus 650.
Plus 650.
And then I doubled up with Jalen Hurts having a great game in the air. 350 or more passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns at plus 1,025. I think that number's attainable, Lou. What they did on the ground,
I think they're both real.
They're going to open up the pass game this week.
Browns already had 2 of those games this year, man. So, and you also have Jalen Hurts more passing yards and Tannehill minus 179 there. I'm with you. I mean, my bets were pretty similar, a little more controlled. I think you're going to get more bang for your buck, though, if we hit on these. I have the over on A.J. Brown's 85 receiving yards. That's plus 100. Jalen Hurts over 238 passing yards, minus 106. And then I like to do a head-to-head matchup as well. Quez Watkins over Nick Westbrook. How do you even say his name? Akina? Westbrook Akina, minus 129. So I'm with you. I think you combine the A.J. Brown revenge game factor against a banged-up secondary. I think he's also going to be a little extra motivated with back-to-back weeks, crucial fumbles in the red zone. He's healthier, too. Last week, he lost 7 pounds due to being sick. So I think you combine all of that, and I think this is against the Lions, against the Steelers type of A.J. Brown performance. And I'm with you, too, with Hurts. I have at least 239 passing yards. He's been under 200 the last 3 weeks. Last week, it was understandable why. They were dominating on the ground against Green Bay. Like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, keep running the ball. But there also have been some weird times the Eagles have, since Dallas Goedert got hurt, they've been extra conservative despite Jalen having success through the air. So I think this week they're going to get back to being, who they were early on in the year against Minnesota and Washington, who they were last month against Houston and against Pittsburgh and against Dallas, where I think they're going to have a lot of success throwing the ball. So over 238, he surpassed 239 6 times this year. That's more than half the games. So I think we both like them to throw the football against the Titans because the Titans' run defense is pretty good. I mean, not that the Eagles can run on anybody to a certain degree, but I think this is going to be a passing game for the first time in like a month.
Bet you couldn't name anybody on the interior of Green Bay's defense last week, and I bet you know who Jeffrey Simmons is this week. I don't want to run the football against Jeffrey Simmons. He is a game ruiner.
We loved him in 2019.
He will just absolutely dominate the point of attack. He will ruin you in the pass game. He will ruin you in the rush game. Go after the cornerbacks because you have 2 guys on the outside and even add Quez Watkins in there that can win one-on-one matchups. And I talked about this in Crossover Thursday with Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans. He said that his biggest concern was that they don't have the guys on the outside that can win those one-on-one matchups. And we saw in that Pittsburgh game when the Eagles know that they can win outside one-on-one, they will continue to throw the football. They won't stop doing it because Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni and the guy that runs your team and owns your team, Jeffrey Lurie, clearly love throwing the football in this day and age. And your quarterback, there's no reason to stop doing it.
No reason.
We know how effective he can be doing that.
They've been under 200 the last 3 weeks, but he's still thrown for 2 touchdowns in 2 of those games. Not to mention, there's been nothing that Hurts has done to make you feel like we need to start scaling things back like in 2021. I mean, for the last month before those games, he was dominating inside the pocket. He's got A.J. Brown still. He still has Devontae Smith. Quez Watkins has been heating up. That's why I made that bet too. I was getting burned by Watkins bets earlier this year, but I'm 3-0 in the last 3 games. So I'm going to keep rolling with Quez now. I like him to have more yards than Akane, so that's going to be a big one too. But yeah, I just think that the passing game has been good all year, and I think they've had to kind of find out who they are now in that way without Goddard. But I mean, they're a team this week that's going to get over 200 yards. I think Jalen's going to get in the end zone consistently, and I think we both like A.J. Brown to be on the receiving end of a lot of that. But it's going to be a good game, I think, for all 3 receivers.
It's going to be one of those games and one of those weeks where we say the Philadelphia Eagles came out on top because they simply had better football players. And to win football games, when your guys dominate as a unit and they dominate their one-on-one matchups and they control what they can control, man, nobody's going to be able to control A.J. Brown come Sunday. He is going to go off. He's going to be like a bat out of hell going against this old team. This one's fun, Lou. I think a lot of us have some pent-up animosity from that 2018 game. And even though there might not be many Titans that are still on that team, there are a bunch of Philadelphia Eagles that remember that in the back of their mind.
I don't let obscure losses go,
number
man.
1 seed too.
And they bounced back and they almost made the NFC title that year. But I don't let little losses go, even 4 years later.
I think we all hate Carolina for that exact reason as well.
Man, I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there just that randomly hate an AFC South team or North team because of a game in 2008. That's just right. We're crazy nut job fans, so that's the way it works. But those are our 3 bets each, all 6 bets presented by BetOnline, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hopefully we can make you guys some money on Sunday. Hopefully the Eagles can as well get this win over the Titans. Kickoffs at 1:00. We will see you for the postgame show right after, right here on Locked On Eagles. You can subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your next listen is the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening to Locked On Eagles, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.